Well, Tyrone and I are pleased to have a very special guest today, TJ Smith. TJ is a former Anne Arundel County commander, chief spokesman for the Baltimore City Police Department, press secretary to Baltimore County Executive Johnny Olszewski, and one of the most impressive items on his resume is he was a candidate for mayor this year earlier. TJ, welcome to the barbershop.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys, and I'm glad I have a fresh cut for the barbershop today.
All right, good. You're looking good.
It makes one of us.
Hey, let me tell you, getting my hair cut after emerging out of the pandemic, I mean, we're still in the middle of it, but once we moved into phase 2 and they allowed barbershops to open on appointment, man, it was, this is my second haircut of this month, and it was the best thing since sliced bread.
Absolutely. Well, this barbershop's been open all along, but you know, we're a little different variation. So we were deemed essential as long as we didn't have people at the shop. So anyway, well, TJ, if you don't mind, why don't we just begin by giving just some general reflections on your run for mayor?
Well, it was a very eye-opening experience, as you can imagine. Taking on a run for office is a heck of a sacrifice for anyone. But when you're in the midst of it and a pandemic hits in the midst of it, it's really extraordinary. I can't imagine there are not many candidates who run for office who don't have the date of the election on their calendar everywhere you look and can't tell you how many days, minutes, hours are left before the election. So having that mindset, and then in the middle of March, they say, we're going to move the finish line. We're going to move it a few more miles down the road, was pretty tough. So that was a very tough part of the election, to add 5 more weeks onto the campaign. But it wasn't 5 more weeks of real work on the ground. It was 5 more weeks of really just sitting at home, trying to come up with different ways to engage the residents of Baltimore. So that was definitely tough. But it was such an eye-opening experience. When I got into this race, I said to myself that I'm going to be getting into this race, and I'm getting into it with the purpose of, if I win, I'm ready to go to work. If I am not successful, I'm content with that as well.
I know Tyrone wants to hop in, but real quick, and as you describe it, when the world shut down in the middle of March, that your campaign, TJ, to my eye, because I was involved, from the outside, but watching it, your campaign was in the streets, and it was a grassroots effort, and you showed real momentum. And then once the world shut down, the campaign shut down, and your whole strategy message was gone.
Yeah, I mean, again, in March, you have the pandemic really taking hold here in America, and we're seeing the realities of it. And a poll comes out late March that puts us in first place, and we have been steadily climbing the polls throughout. And we had a strategy and a game plan as to how we were going to leverage things as we continue through the month of March. We had fundraisers that we had to cancel, like 6 fundraisers. Just imagine that as a politician, first of all. It's a big deal. But our strong suit was being in the streets. Our strong suit was being at community meetings and having that engagement with people. And that was changing people's minds, quite frankly. And unfortunately, when everything shut down, it just took that opportunity away from us. And we were left to try to pick up the pieces and do as much as we could. What that did was give the people with more money the opportunity to be on television. And again, with a grassroots campaign, that wasn't what our goal was for an entire 2 months, just to stay on television when you couldn't physically be out there interacting with people.
And it looks like at the end of the day, they erred on the side of name recognition when you look at how things shook out in the end. TJ, one of the things that was foremost in your campaign And one of the things that people know about you is that you had some tragedy in your family with regard to the crime in Baltimore. And you and I, unfortunately, share that commonality. My nephew, he was shot and killed in Baltimore City in November of last year.
I'm sorry.
And thank you. So we are looking at, as a city, we're looking at another record year. Hopefully we will not achieve that, but the trajectory is such that it looks like that might happen. And we're also having this debate in the country right now with regard to our relationship with the police force. And we've had Mr. Scott, Brandon Scott, come out and make some remarks that will have people to believe he may be amenable to decreasing the budget of a department that's already understaffed. So can you weigh in on that? What this crime problem is suppressing everything else about Baltimore, the economy especially. People are afraid to go into the city. Amazon said, hey, one of the reasons we're not coming here is because you can't protect our people. What would the TJ Smith crime plan have looked like?
Well, first, the defund the police movement that's going on around the country, and of course is visited here in Baltimore, is, in my opinion, I understand the context around the notion to defund certain aspects of policing. I don't like the language because there are too many people saying defund and abolish. Abolishing police is irresponsible and is a knee-jerk reaction to things that we need to address within policing. We absolutely have to address the atrocities that we've seen taking place. George Floyd should be alive. Elijah McClain should be alive. We can go down a list of people that should be alive, but if policing doesn't progress, then we're going to continue to see some of these challenges. But that doesn't mean throw the baby out with the bathwater. And this notion of defunding, which I think Baltimore made some knee-jerk reactions to appease a crowd, as opposed to really make thoughtful decisions on what this means. I don't think you're going to meet too many police officers across the country who will say, no, I want to respond to that person who's having a behavioral crisis or a mental crisis. No, I want to respond to that kid who's not listening to his parent. Most police officers don't want to respond to those things, but oftentimes the low-hanging fruit is picking up the phone, dialing 911, and responding to those things that no one else has the capacity to do at 1 a.m. We should not have law enforcement responding to those things. I've challenged Baltimore City over the entire course of my campaign. We have an incident with squeegee people in the city. The next day, I see Baltimore police officers, uniformed Baltimore police officers, handing out pamphlets for them to go get assistance, whether it's job assistance, whether it's counseling. And I questioned it. Why is it a Baltimore City police officer that's handing that out, and not social services, and not the Office of Black Male Engagement, and not workforce development, and not Baltimore City Public Schools? So we could go down the laundry list of the opportunities that we've already had to transition from using the police for these things, where we can increase the funding in order to dispatch the right people to certain social situations that are going on. The Baltimore Police Department had a homeless outreach team. They were forced to put that together because there wasn't a resource that was able to provide that after hours. We don't need armed police officers interacting with homeless people. That's a social services thing. So yes, I agree that we should be reallocating funding, the identified funding for those specific tasks, and taking some of that off the plate of police. So from a crime prevention standpoint, when I was speaking of it, look, I made no bones about it. We have to hold violent repeat offenders accountable, and they're the ones who should be occupying jail cells, and we shouldn't apologize for that. You look at just the last couple of weeks of violence that's occurred in Baltimore. We see a mother, and a pregnant mother, 8-month pregnant woman, and her 3-year-old toddler daughter shot and killed in a car. You can't make excuses for the person who carried out such a crime. That's who jail cells should be occupied by. And we have to go in and we have to disrupt the guns that are coming into our city, and they're coming in bulk. They're not coming in one by one. They're coming in bulk because the accessibility is so great. So there's so many levels of this, But really, when we look at this, as we look at the short term and the long term, the short term is going after those who are causing the immediate violence. The long term is investing in the areas like the education and job opportunities so that you can lessen the pool of people who are going to be those criminals in the future.
You know, TJ, I think one of the things that most impressed me about your campaign was when you highlighted those several women whose sons had been murdered, and just listening to their story, it brought it home. I guess if we could go back in time and could somehow infuse the campaign with more resources to highlight that, everything is a situation of many different elements, but I really feel like those mothers, those victims of the high crime rate didn't get the spotlight that they needed. But I really want to commend you for making the effort. And, had you had the unlimited money to kind of really highlight that, I'm not sure I'm not even talking politically, TJ.
I'll tell you, that was the toughest day of my campaign. The day that we filmed that ad with that featured 3 moms who lost their children. And one thing that I've always been passionate about is that they are survivors. And when we count the murder rate, as Tyrone mentioned early on, his nephew was killed last year. There were 348 murders last year. They're not counting Tyrone. They're not counting his nephew's mother and father as victims. They're counting the individual that's no longer here with us, but not talking about the survivors who have to deal with that pain every day. And that's one of my things with how we discuss violence in Baltimore. We can't quantify it as there were 348 murders last year. There were 348 families destroyed last year. Hundreds of people are actually victims of the 340. Thousands of people are victims of the 348 murders and the 160 plus murders we've had this year. So we have to change the way we talk about it. And the interesting thing about the moms that were in this ad, I've been friends with them, unfortunately, over the years through connectivity of their loss. And they were willing and able to be in that ad. And one of the things that was interesting, and this wasn't even done purposely, all of those moms, their children were double-digit number murders. My brother was murdered 173. You have candidates that talk about getting under 300 murders, getting under 200 murders, cutting the murder rate in half. When you quantify it that way, and the way that a lot of people have talked about it, all of us would have still been victims of murder under their crime strategy and philosophy. We can't settle for that to be good enough. We of course, reductions are great, but we can't think under 300 is a great benchmark of success. We can't think 175 murders is a benchmark of success when all of us still would have been in that ad, even if we had 175 murders.
Exactly.
Yeah, I grew up in Baltimore City, West Side, North and Dukeland. Okay, and that was back in the day when we had friends over on the Alameda. They could come all the way over to the West Side, no problem, ride their bikes over. Now, you don't have a situation where you feel comfortable letting your kids play outside like we did, when we were coming up. So when you consider not just the murders, but the violence, it always kind of perplexes me when they read the statistics and they say, well, violent crime is down, murders are up. Murder is the most violent crime, and I know they're parsing statistics and whatnot. I get it, but how do we treat the violent offender who has not murdered as harshly in terms of punishment as we do with someone who has murdered? So, for example, if we have someone who is the second time person who was assaulted, someone robbed them with a firearm, I think personally that sending that person away, the second time they've done it, they've indicated they no longer are interested in being a part of civil society. Sending them away to send the message, football schools, that this is not going to be tolerated, in that we do have programs that can assist you in becoming a productive citizen if that's what you want. But if you choose this other route, then you're going to wait for quite some time. Is that the type of solution that you think would be effective?
Well, we don't punish violent offenders enough, and we have more apologists for violent offenders than anything. And yeah, I'm gonna keep it real because that's what I do. We apologize for violent offenders. We make excuses for them over and over and over again when they have proven time and time again that they don't want to get themselves together. Of course, everyone deserves a second chance, but you don't deserve a second chance to kill my loved one again or kill another loved one. That's not what you deserve second chances for over and over again. And here's the reality in Maryland, for instance. If you possess a handgun, merely possess a handgun, in the city of Baltimore, anywhere in the state, it's a misdemeanor. It's a misdemeanor. And if I'm walking down the street and I got that handgun in my dip and I'm coming to blow one of your heads off and the cops get me before I get to you, it's a misdemeanor. I'm taking a central booking and I'm out in a few hours. If I have 20 bags of heroin in my pocket and the cops come and pick me off with that 20 bags of heroin in my pocket, it's going to be a felony possession with intent to distribute. I'm going to spend more time in jail awaiting trial for that drug possession with intent than I would for the gun when I was about to blow your brains out, when I actually could have been selling those drugs to take care of my family and make ends meet. Again, I'm not making excuses for violating the law, but what I'm saying is we're going to hold the non-violent offender more accountable than we hold the person that is likely to be the violent offender. That's a problem. We have to fix that. And we can't, you have these people who conflate the issue of, quote, mandatory minimums with what happened back in the day when non-violent offenders were subject to mandatory minimums. That's ridiculous. Absolutely. I totally disagree with that. But you don't get 3 times to go out and shoot someone and kill people and think that there are no repercussions. It's anarchy in the city of Baltimore. And if you look, you can get a student right now to do a study on every murder suspect and, to an extent, murder victim, and we can probably safely say 80+% should have or could have been in jail at the time that they committed the offense or became a victim of the offense. It's not a correction system. It's a place that they hold you for a period of time and then make you stronger, and you go back out on the street and you're better at the crimes that you committed to get in there. So reentry is also a big thing to me because we can't send people in and expect an output that's different if we're not providing anything for them.
TJ, I don't want to get down in the psychological weeds, but how did we get to the point where, as you just described, a situation where someone ends up possessing a gun, and the reality was that gun he was 4 minutes away from going and blowing someone's head off, is viewed as less severe than the possession of drugs like that. How do we get to that point where legislatively, legally, one is deemed as less important?
Well, I mean, I think you have the activists, Second Amendment activists, with the whole gun thing. This is about the illegal possession of a gun, not the ability for you to legally possess it. It's about the illegal possession of it. But we have to go back and look at the history of the war on drugs, obviously. The war on drugs and the laws that we now know disproportionately affected minority communities, particularly Black communities, is something that is failed. It's a failed policy because we tied the drugs to the violence, which is true in essence, but we overemphasize the charges on people possessing the drugs than possessing the weapons. So it becomes a felony, of course, if you're taking that weapon and you're actually committing another crime. So if I'm robbing you with the gun, then yes, it's a felon. It's a felony to rob someone, and I'm using the handgun in the commission of a felony, which is a felony. If I'm a subsequent offender who already has a felony, then I'm a felon in possession of that handgun. But the point is, you can possess a gun and you can be out of jail within 24 hours. I tell this story often about a young man by the name of Curtis Deal. In 2017, Curtis Deal was shot and killed by a Baltimore police officer after he turned the gun towards that Baltimore police officer, a loaded handgun, He turned it towards that Baltimore police officer, and the officer was forced to shoot him. Curtis Steele was 18 at the time. He turned 18 in November of 2016. So about 4 months, he was 18. He was arrested 3 times in the month of January for handguns. 24 hours before he was shot, he was in prison. And he got out awaiting trial again for a handgun. Unfortunately, you can look at that and say the system is the reason for his death. And the system put a police officer, Baltimore police officer, in so much jeopardy that they were forced to use deadly force against him. And you look at that situation, you say, well, this could have been avoided. Like, how do you have a young man at that age with the ability to get 3 guns in a matter of weeks and be arrested for them and still be on the street?
Well, you just had a similar incident in Baltimore County a week or so ago in Essex, where the guy had been convicted of firearms charges, and then he has a weapon on him. He's fleeing from the police, and the Baltimore County police officer shot him. And it was another one of those cases, just like you said, where, you know, if he had been serving a serious sentence for the previous offenses, he might be alive today.
Right, correct. And those stories exist time and time again. And even the victims of homicide, 85% of the victims of homicide have had contact with the criminal justice system. And then 50% of those have had handgun violations. So you look at this group and you know, you just see there's something else you can do from a crime and punishment standpoint. You know, accountability has become a bad word. You know, you have to hold people accountable. And I like to use the example of things when we talk about increasing the penalty for illegal gun possession or what have you. You know, you have an activist crowd who's totally against that. That's wrong, blah, blah, blah. Then you have people who think that that's the answer. Now, somewhere in between is the answer. But here's the reality. If we're riding down the street in Baltimore, Northern Parkway, for instance, and they put up some speeding cameras, some new speed cameras in that area, and they have warnings for the first 30 days, and they've been educating you for the last 90 days. Hey, on this date and time, on Northern Parkway, new speed camera is going to come. If you keep going down that street at 45 miles per hour and the speed limit is 25 miles per hour, you're going to get a repercussion. It's going to be a consequence for your action. You're going to get a ticket in the mail. Then you're going to know, you know what? I don't want to keep paying these tickets. So you're going to adjust your behavior as a result because there's a consequence to your action. So again, there has to be some sort of consequence to the action. And arresting our way out of it is not the answer. And I don't want people to grasp onto one thing and think that that's the answer. No, if you tie in everything I'm saying together, we have to invest in education. We have to invest in opportunity, because what you want is to shrink the pool of people that are coming out of their youth and into adulthood that aren't choosing crime. And those people who are going to be reemerging from jail and prison, they have to have opportunities, and we have to work those opportunities behind the walls because they're less likely to reoffend when they come home. These are 2 big demographics that if you impact, you have less violence, period.
No doubt. I do agree with that. Let me ask you this. Kurt Schmoke, he came up with the radical idea.
Well, he thought he was crazy.
People thought he was crazy. Kind of ended his career, political career, one could say. He even made it to the late night shows with his idea of decriminalizing certain drugs. And at the time, you know, that the decriminalization piece got lost in translation. A lot of people took it as a free-for-all. No, you could think of alcohol as being a decriminalized substance from the 20s. You can't jump in a 747 after, you know, sitting at the bar for half an hour. There are rules that go along with it. But he was on the radio a week ago, and they played the clip of him talking about decriminalizing certain drugs. And he made the point, and it just crystallized. He said, look, what we've done since I made those comments has not worked.
That's right.
So what do you think about, you know, taking a look at that decriminalization piece a little further and coupling it with treatment so that we can kind of get in between the demand of this stuff and attack it from that vantage point as well?
Well, if I had the opportunity to have a running mate, I would certainly have you vetted, Tyrone, because we're on the same sheet of music with this. I remember being a young kid at the time that Kurt Schmoke became mayor in 1987, and I remember him saying that. And I actually somehow or another understood it at that time when he talked about taking the value out of these drugs so that the competition isn't there, so that these
Right.
guys on the corner aren't shooting each other over it. I said, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, I don't understand the concept. At the time, I'm thinking, so that means when I'm going down to play my video game at 7-Eleven, somebody can come in and buy a bag of heroin or something. I didn't understand that then. I understand it a lot more now. When we talk about the different ideology that's out there, I'm really progressive on the whole drug possession thing. First of all, I don't think the state has gone far enough on the decriminalization of marijuana. 10 grams is one of the more conservative amounts of decriminalization across the country. That's the amount that is decriminalized in the state of Maryland. Realistically, what the state should have done was get rid of the possession of marijuana, period. There shouldn't be a criminal charge for simply possessing marijuana, no matter how many grams it is. It's up to the police officers, detectives, or whatever to articulate distribution. That's the only thing we should be worried about when it comes to possession of marijuana. But I'll be honest as well. What value is it taking someone to jail for one heroin capsule, one crack rock? What value is it in having them occupy a jail cell? There isn't any. So we should be looking at decriminalizing the first and subsequent even offenses of drug possession, because those are sick people. If we know better, we need to do better. So that means we have to increase our capacity for treatment. Now, one of the things I was asked on the campaign trail was about the safe injection sites. Now, that's not something that I've become well versed enough in to say I wholly support it, but I told the groups who were asking me about it, no different than when condoms became a thing, and the conversations of whether they should be readily available for people, no different than needle exchange programs when that became a thing. Do I have to open and broaden my horizons on a topic such as this? And the answer is yes. At the same time, I think that we have to ensure we don't create another problem while trying to solve one, and that is making sure there's enough treatment options. Baltimore has a program called Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion that's still in a pilot phase. It needs to move out of the pilot phase and into actuality, where the low-level drug offenders are taken straight to treatment instead of criminal. And the law has to catch up with that, and we have to start investing in that. So as we talk about defunding, we have to look at things like that. Do we want to increase the funding for such programs to get more people into treatment instead of criminalizing?
I'll let Pat jump in here, but I'll make a prediction. I think that in the wake of the COVID shutdown and the states are now facing some tough financial straits, I think that that may be one of the things we see as a relaxation on dispensaries and things like that to open up a source of tax revenue associated with the legal possession of marijuana. I think we're really going to see that, not just in Maryland, but all over the country. And look, it's uncomfortable to talk about, for me at least, it's uncomfortable to talk about, these needle exchange, different programs, but we've got to sit back and admit what we've been doing since the 80s has certainly not worked.
It's a paradigm shift that we have to get used to and realize everything that we've tried to do to combat it hasn't worked. And, this is really probably a bad example and I probably won't use it. But, if you're a father of daughters and you try to get them to refrain from certain activity, or children in general, and you hold them back from certain activities and think that you can shelter them, then once they bust out of their shell, they're going to bust out of their shell and be something that you didn't anticipate creating. So we could be creating monsters by trying to prevent so much, and we've made it more difficult to actually control it and treat it. So I think that that's what we have to look at and recognize that people have problems. So how do we treat the people problem as opposed to the problem that the people have? And if you don't have an urge to do drugs, then there won't be a market for drugs. So we have to treat that.
Yeah.
real quick, one of the things that impacted me, they brought a guy in who was a former addict to our school one day, and he gave a half-hour presentation of what it was really like to be addicted to drugs. No glamour in it. I mean, this guy was straight up, and I can tell you, he put the thought out of a lot of kids' minds as to ever trying that. I talked to some of the people I went to school with to this day, and they said that guy, his speech was very effective. So that education piece as well.
Yeah, I mean, I love this sort of broad thinking because, you know, what we're talking about here incorporates kind of life. It incorporates human nature. It incorporates behavior. I mean, you know, we all, hey, God, human beings with human nature. And I think an approach like we've been talking about, is expanding our thing, broadening it, kind of bringing it up, like with the war on drugs that was, you know, kind of really got going in the 80s. And it just, a lot of stuff that came out of it is not suitable for today. But I guess, and maybe, you know, this makes me kind of seem like an old fogey, but I think one of the things our culture and our politics has sort of given short shrift to is the concept of personal responsibility too. And guys, we all know a truly happy life involves a strong sense of personal responsibility.
Absolutely.
And, you know, and I'm not, I don't want to sound, you know, sort of saying, you know, silly, but it's true, and you can't. But what I like about where I see the country going is sort of a broadening of, you know, thinking outside the kind of boxes we've been in for decades. So I dig that. TJ, a couple of things. First, and I'm going to ask you the questions and then you answer them as you want. First, are you optimistic about Baltimore City over the next 5-10 years? And also, I would like to know a couple of things in your experience running for mayor that confirmed your faith in human nature, and maybe a couple things that might have, you know, slightly made you question a couple
slightly. Well, I want to be optimistic about the future of Baltimore. I think that the future can be bright. The government is of the people, and we have to demand what we want. And, you know, I often used to say when I was on the campaign trail for people who were staunch supporters, I'm not Superman, and Superman's not coming to save us. Batman ain't coming, you know, you can call it Gotham City all you want. It's going to take all of us. I'm telling you that I have the courage to do things that other politicians might not have, but I need your support because some of these things won't be wildly popular with the political nucleus that exists. One thing that was reaffirmed through this election is that there were no surprises. There were no upsets. Everything went the way it was supposed to go. And I say that because the union endorsed candidates, the endorsed candidates, the status quo candidates, the machine candidates throughout won. So that actually helped me emerge out of this, not thinking, oh my gosh, I can't. If I lost by a few hundred votes and it was the battle of the outsiders, then I would be sitting here today like we're drinking my Corona, you know. But I'm looking at it like, man, we had an opportunity to go in a different direction. The city chose not to. And I don't have sour grapes. I don't want to sound that way at all. But I've been a huge advocate for, and I talked about it even before my election. We need ranked choice voting, or we need a runoff situation, because at the end of the day, 70% of Baltimoreans in the primary election voted for someone other than the Democratic nominee. That's a huge number of people who think differently about what they want. And we have to somehow or another try to bring that all together. So my hope is, I mean, again, you have 30% of the people driving the messaging of the city, basically. And in your council districts, even less than that with the amount of people who voted in specific districts. So my hope is that we can have broad, wide-ranging conversations that aren't just one track. People would ask me, are you a progressive? I said, I don't wear those titles. I'm progressive on certain things, like I talked about the drug stuff. I think that's very progressive. I'm moderate on a number of things as well, but that doesn't mean I'm not open to hearing you. I think it's funny, like people in the bike community, the advocates, they really have it out for me, but they never even gave me the chance to talk to them. It's that type of, for lack of a better word, ignorant thinking that doesn't allow us to sit at the table and say, you know what, we have so much in common here. I love riding my bike. I love the idea of protected bike lanes. My son just learned how to ride his bike, and it is great. He went raving to his mom about how he was riding in the street because we were in a protected bike lane. He felt good about, I was riding on the big boy lanes. I love the idea and the concept. That doesn't mean I'm going to go and blow up 83 tomorrow, but I'm all for doing what we can to get to a better place for alternative modes of transportation. But people feel like they have to take these roles and these positions and they entrench their feet in the sand, and you're not moving. This is it. And that's not how I am. I'm flexible. And it goes back to the safe injection sites. Convince me. I'm open to being convinced. I'm a sponge. With the more knowledge, the better decisions we can all make. I'm hopeful that in the future of our city, we can have people that are open to changing their minds and changing their opinions on some of the things that they've talked about over the years.
Well, I'm no longer a Baltimore City voter, haven't been one for a while, but Pat can certainly tell you, I thought, you would have been the best person for the job down there, breath of fresh air. So I want to ask you this, what's next for TJ Smith?
Well, first of all, I appreciate that. That definitely would have won if I could have voted for you, I would have voted. Many people in the county have said that. And I'm also one who believes that we have to break down the walls between the city and the county and get the chip off of our shoulder. We need county residents to come into the city, spend their money, and create more opportunity, because the more county residents come in and the more demand that there is, the more opportunity that there will be for people who live in the city and work in the city, which creates more revenue for the city to do more things. That's like the basic economy 101 there. But what's next for me? I'm taking it slowly. I'm doing a little bit of everything, actually keeping a fairly busy schedule, trying to get my sleep pattern back on track. But I'm trying to, do a little bit of everything, some podcasting, maybe some radio here and there, some consulting, but just keeping my ear to the ground. Of course, still trying to provide the platform that I can to allow people who have lost their loved ones to be able to express themselves. That's something that's near and dear to me. And of course, whatever I can do. And I think I don't even say this is something that I'm going to do. It's something that I've done and will continue to do. If I can mentor young people, young men in particular, and help them in their decision-making process, that's what I'm going to keep doing. But I'm taking it slow before I'm back in a 9-to-5 per se type job. I want to just, decompress, because it's been a long, grueling time, and we're in a heck of a time right now with this pandemic. We as residents, and even if you're not a resident, you have an interest in the city. So many people want to come and patronize the city, want to be part of the city, going to the Orioles games, or the Ravens games, or the arena, or Pier 6, or what have you, the harbor. We all have a voice at the table, and your voice isn't muted just because you don't live in the city. You want to see the city succeed, and we have to be willing to open our ears and listen to people with diverse opinions than ours, and more importantly, diverse experiences. There's so much that I want to do that's just outside the box. For instance, I'll give you a for instance. On my Facebook page, I posted this the other day. I love fishing. I don't want to say I'm an avid fisherman because I'm not that good at it, but I love fishing. And I've been fishing a zillion times since the campaign ended. And one of my things that I've always been fond of is I go downtown in between Ampersy and Bond Street Social Club, there's an old pier that's just wooden planks now, and it's destroyed. You can't access it. But I look at that as an opportunity. I said, we can redo this pier through a public-private partnership even, and make this pier another centerpiece of downtown Baltimore. But we can also loop in an educational aspect of it and teach young kids how to fish. We're also tricking them into learning what the environment is like and what pollution means and what our waterways are like here in Baltimore. That's a centerpiece of being a Baltimorean, the waterways, right? You can trick especially young Black kids who disproportionately don't know how to swim into wanting to learn how to swim, because now they're out on this pier and they're thinking, what if I fall into this water? I want to be able to survive. But I've thought about this thing over years and how we can monetize it in some ways, but we can make it an educational experience where we're teaching an entirely new generation a hobby and a different level of survivor skills and about the environment. Because as they're learning to tie these knots and they're getting their hooks out in the water, and that kid who keeps breaking his hook on the debris that's in the harbor is going to get frustrated. And they're going to teach their other friends when they're in North Baltimore, don't throw that bottle down in the gutter because it's going to end up in the bay. Right now, they're not connecting that because they're not seeing what the results of it. When they see it, I think it brings about a different response to it. My son and I were fishing down at Port Covington a couple weeks ago, and his rod got hooked on something. I knew it wasn't the big one as we reeled it in. It ended up being a metal canister with like little. It was open enough that you could hook onto it. That we pulled up, a metal container of some sort, a huge one. I mean, probably this big. And he's like, "Wow, Daddy, people throw a lot of junk in the harbor." Yeah, our first 3 big catches that day were that, a plastic bottle, and a beer, like disposed beer case, the cardboard ones. So again, the more we expose people to different things, the more they understand it. And I think if we educate people better and educate people differently, they'll appreciate it more. So there are a lot of things that are near and dear to my heart that I'm going to continue to be an advocate for, and teaching our youth and how we teach our youth and the life skills that we teach our youth are one of the things that are really going to be important as we press forward.
You know, TJ, you hit on a critical point, and that is that the city of Baltimore needs the state of Maryland, and the state of Maryland needs the city of Baltimore.
Absolutely.
And it comes back to that whole concept of working together. And you make an excellent point. How do we as human beings learn? By experience. So how does a child understand about the environment and pollution? Well, as you just said, take them down, show them some of the bad things right now and what it leads to, and they experience it. And there is no substitute for experience.
That's right. Yes, sir. So I appreciate you guys having me. It's
Thank
a
you.
great conversation.
TJ Smith, Tyrone and I are very, very appreciative of you coming on the barbershop today. And we look forward to future endeavors, whether it's another appearance here or just meeting out on the streets of Baltimore or wherever. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And we have to keep talking. We talk about it, we keep it out there, and we get it into action. So thank you.